it's an honor to have you here. I turn it over to you, Julie.
Great. Hey, hello. I hope everybody can hear me and see me. And thanks for having me and thanks for tuning in. I just want to give you a little background about who you're listening to and looking at. I am a psychiatrist. I was born in 1965. I grew up in the 70s in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts, on the East Coast, and I went to summer camp up in New Hampshire. And I'm a like a woodsy northeastern kind of New Englander. And I was a very smart kid. I was very curious, and I was a bit of a drug researcher, I think, even in my teenage years. Very curious about different substances and how they worked, and how they felt in me, and what their mechanism of action was. And that these are still the questions that I have frequently about drugs. Um, I went to University of Pennsylvania. My major was something called the biological basis of behavior, which was like a biopsych sort of neurobio combo. And my concentration within the biological basis of behavior was psychopharmacology. So I was officially at college studying drugs and behavior, and I had a minor in human sexuality at Penn, and also I was singing in a band. So my formative years were very much sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and except that I was a pre-med. I knew I wanted to be a doctor. I knew I wanted to be some sort of a brain doctor, and I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a brain surgeon. Was very interested in psychiatry, even as an undergrad. Even in high school, I was interested in psychology and psychiatry, and it's why I went to Penn. Um, and then while I was at Penn, I started reading about a new drug, which back then was called Adam, which was MDMA, methylene dioxymethamphetamine. Most of you know it better as ecstasy or Molly. So when I was a sophomore in college, I had spent a summer. I was living in a I was living in a castle in the summer of 1985. In the middle of the campus at Penn, there's a fraternity, and the fraternity house really looks very much like a castle. I had a room in a turret, felt a bit like Rapunzel. And that was the summer of 85 when a lot of articles started coming out about this new drug that therapists and psychiatrists were using with their patients. So I was very excited by this. I mean, first of all, there hadn't been any new drugs since I was a teenager, and I felt like I had tried most of the drugs that there were. So I was excited by the prospect that there was something new. Um, this is really before the days of designer drugs and molecules coming out of Eastern Europe every few weeks that have a different alphabet attached to them. So there being a new drug was a very big deal back in the mid 80s. Um, and I spent some time getting in touch with psychiatrists and therapists that had been using MDMA in their practice and learned more about their discovery. They were very excited about it. And that was when I befriended Rick Doblin, who is the head of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And Rick and I actually took MDMA together the last day that it was legal in the summer of 1985. But the thing I remember the most, the first time I took MDMA, was how quiet my head was and my brain was. I felt like whatever little inner monologue and narration that was constantly going was quieted. Um, and I could sort of control the speed of my thoughts. And I was really impressed by that. And I remember having a very strong intuition the very first time I ingested MDMA, that this is a drug that could really be helpful for people with a lot of inner monologue or a lot of inner narration, for instance, people with schizophrenia. So the first book that I ever published was actually a book that I edited. I assigned a lot of chapters to different people, and I wrote a lot of the book. And that was a book called Ecstasy, the Complete Guide. And because of that summer 1985, I ended up befriending a lot of people who knew a lot about MDMA. And so I assigned everybody a chapter. And the proceeds from that book are actually, it's a nonprofit project where all the proceeds fund clinical research. So it is true that I was a medical monitor for MDMA clinical research for many, many years. But recently, actually, I've been either promoted or demoted, depending on what your point of view is. But I am no longer a medical monitor. Now, maps.org, they have a series of medical monitors, a whole group of medical monitors. So now I'm a medical advisor, which I'm hoping is just a bit like a fairy grandmother. Like I just stay off to the side a little bit more. But I was medical monitor for many of the early studies. And what's exciting now is that MAPS is conducting multi-center trials with MDMA in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, these are phase 3 trials, and once the data is accumulated and presented to the FDA, we may very well have another FDA-approved medicine that can be used in psychiatry as a catalyst to make the therapy go deeper. And this would be a very wonderful thing. Anyway, this is a very long aside in my college years. So after undergrad at Penn, I went to medical school at Temple University. I stayed in Philadelphia. I was singing in a band and we were making videos, and I couldn't really leave Philly. So I did both. I went to med school and fronted a band for a couple of years. And when I was in med school, I did research on auditory hallucinations and schizophrenia. I got very interested in psychosis and what psychosis felt like and looked like. And I worked a lot with people with schizophrenia or with manic episodes. And then my psychiatric residency I did at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. And that was when I did schizophrenia research. And I won an award from the National Institute of Mental Health on my research project. And after my residency, I got a fellowship at Columbia. I was going to do a neuroimaging fellowship in schizophrenia, but I ended up getting a job offer because I had done an elective at Bellevue Hospital in the psychiatric emergency room, and I had loved it there, and they had loved me there, and it was just a fabulous place to work. So I ended up taking a job working weekends at Bellevue every Saturday night and Sunday night. I ran a 15, 16-hour shift overnight at the Bellevue Psychiatric Emergency Room. So for those of you in Vancouver who aren't familiar with Bellevue, it is the United States' oldest public hospital, and it is sort of a beacon for psychiatric patients. I think many people around our country and even around the globe, if they felt like they were going crazy or having some sort of problems where they needed a psychiatrist, people would just show up on our doorstep in the Psych ER. We got psychotic people from all over the city and all over the country and the world. And it was a fabulous place to work. I never knew quite what I was going to get into when I walked in. And when I wrote a book called Weekends at Bellevue about my time there, and I really described my overnight shifts as a little bit like a psychedelic trip or like an acid trip, and that I knew it was going to last about 12 or 14 hours, and I knew I'd probably see the sunrise. And I had to be very flexible with whatever was going to come my way and just kind of go with it. And I knew that I was going to come out the other side, probably physically unharmed, but definitely psychically and spiritually very much changed. And that is really what my time at Bellevue was. Great experiences that required a tremendous amount of flexibility and resilience to just keep going back to that place over and over. So while I was at Bellevue, I built up a private practice, a private psychiatric practice in New York City. And after about 15 or 20 years of having a private practice, I wrote another book, which was really about how women are over-pathologized, over-medicated, over-prescribed. And the book is called Moody Bitches. And the subtitle of Moody Bitches is the truth about the drugs you're taking, the sleep you're missing, the sex you're not having, and what's really making you crazy. And that last part, what's really making you crazy, that was the last chapter of Moody Bitches. And that's where I really started to flesh out this idea that a lot of what is creating our pathology and our depression and our anxiety and our unease and our push for escapism or to soothe ourselves with alcohol or other drugs or food or the internet or shopping, a lot of this unrest is really stemming from a very basic disconnection that we are having, that we are disconnected from our bodies, that we are disconnected from the present moment, that we feel disconnected from nature, from each other. So that was the last chapter of Good Chemistry of Moody Bitches. And then when I wrote Good Chemistry, I really sort of started from where Moody Bitches left off. I started with this premise that disconnection makes us feel terrible and connection makes us feel good. And that connection is really what we need to be healthy physically and to be healthy mentally. So the way Good Chemistry is structured, I talk about connection in 6 different phases. The first is connection with the self. And here again, the idea is that if you are in your body and physically embodied, you will be more at ease than if you are disconnected from your body. You will be physically healthier. And if you are in the present moment, you'll be mentally healthier. And then the second chapter is about connecting with another person, whether that is a lover or a business partner or a friend, but what those sort of connections mean. And then the third chapter is about connecting as a family. And here is when I talk about pregnancy and childbirth and nursing. And here's where I really get into this issue of oxytocin. You know, Good Chemistry really is a book all about oxytocin. But in the third chapter, family, is when I specifically start to talk about how oxytocin works in the body. Oxytocin, as you may know, it is a hormone and a neurotransmitter. It works within the brain, but also between the brain and the rest of the body. And it is responsible for a lot of very intense united states and connected states. For instance, oxytocin enables nursing. It enables the milk to come down through the breast, but it also enables the bonding and the trusting and the connecting that has to happen in order for nursing to happen. Oxytocin also enables childbirth. It is also present in orgasm, and it is also present in a lot of altered states. And it really undergirds any social connection and bonding and trusting that happens. So the fourth chapter is about what happens in a community and how communities bond. And here's where I talk about sort of the, excuse me, the sort of the dirty little secret about oxytocin, or the seamy underbelly, which is that it also enables a lot of us versus them kind of behavior. That because oxytocin enables social cohesion, you know, one of the things that groups really cohere around is a group identity and group beliefs. And then also this idea that, you know, you're on my team, you're in my group, but those people over there, they're on the other team, they're in the other tribe. And so this kind of us versus them thinking, excuse me, is enabled by oxytocin to a large degree. So we've got connection to self, connection to others, family, community. And then I have a chapter on connecting with nature, where I talk a lot about just when you are outside in the forest or at the seashore, you can feel small and like you're part of something bigger than you are. And you're connected to something bigger than you are. You know, you can feel a part of nature. There's a particular sort of mental state, which is awe, when you are in awe or something, or you are in a state of awe, where you feel small and something else feels very big and you feel connected to it. So I think if you're lying on your back and you're looking at the stars, and you feel sort of part of the cosmos. So that's the fifth chapter, connected with nature. And then the last chapter of the book is really about connecting with the cosmos and the universe. And that's where I talk more about psychedelic experiences. Many of you watching and listening may have some familiarity with these peak psychedelic experiences, but what often happens at the peak of a psychedelic experience, or a peak of a mystical experience, is that you have this sense that everything is connected, and that you are part of everything, and you are sort of jacked into the universe. And it can be a very heady, potent, fabulous feeling to feel like you're part of something. I think it's worth going back a little bit. I'm going to go way back, and I'm going to talk about when we were cave people and, you know, living on the savannah. We are social primates. Human beings are actually categorized as obligatorily gregarious. This means that if we are not social, we will not survive. So we are really programmed to cooperate, to collaborate, to share. Um, as much as you have probably been sold this idea that fight or flight is the key to our survival, it's really not true. The ability to attack or flee and to gear up for that kind of battle, whether it's an aggressive maneuver or an evasive maneuver, but to put yourself in fight or flight, that means you are in the sympathetic mode of the nervous system. And so that means that your heart rate is up, your blood pressure is up, your palms are sweaty, your muscles are clenched, you're not digesting your food, you're very awake and hyper alert. It is an alarm state. It is an acute, stressed out state. And it may be the key to our survival sometimes if you have to attack or flee to survive. But the truth is that as social primates, the key to our survival really is being social, and having good social skills and staying in the group, because the group will take care of you. Back in the days on the savannah, if the group kicked you out, you were going to get picked off by a predator. There was safety in the group. And also, if the group likes you, they'll share their food with you. They'll help you build a shelter. They'll make sure that you get a mate. They'll watch your children. There's a lot of advantages to having good social skills and ingratiating yourself in a group. And also, importantly, being able to monitor social cues so you know whether you're in or out and what you have to do to sort of maneuver your way to be in better standing in the group. So when we are isolated, when we are apart from the group, we naturally are in this fight or flight mode. It is a stressor for us to be isolated. The converse of that is if you feel part of something bigger, if you feel taken care of, if somebody has your back, if somebody's on your team, you're going to feel safer. And so what is the opposite of fight or flight? What is the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system? What is the part of the nervous system that doesn't attack or run away, but actually enables us to stay and be present and work through our problems and cooperate and collaborate and connect and trust? And that whole side of the nervous system is called the parasympathetic system. So parasympathetic, unlike fight or flight, parasympathetic allows you to rest, digest, and very importantly, to repair. So you're in fight or flight, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you've got insomnia, you have ulcers, maybe your metabolism is all screwed up, maybe you're overweight, your immune system is screwed up, maybe you've got autoimmune diseases. These are all things that happen when you're in fight or flight, right? You get asthma, you get high blood pressure, you get arthritis, you get diabetes, you're overweight, you can't sleep, you have ulcers. It's a bit of a mess. And very importantly, as long as you're in fight or flight, your body cannot repair itself, right? It can't really run these sort of self-repairing protocols that are run when you are in the parasympathetic. So when you are in rest and digest and repair, you can sleep, you can digest your food, your body fixes itself, you are in more of an anti-inflammatory state, right? So fight or flight, sympathetic, unhealthy, isolated, pro-inflammatory, none of that do you want. Parasympathetic, you have a sense of belonging, you're in a group, your heart rate and blood pressure are much better, you are calmer, you can sleep, you can digest your food, you can also have sex, and you can be social, right? Social skills when you are stressed out, as we all know, are not very good, right? We're snappy, we're irritable. And the analogy that I often give is like, if there's a fire in your kitchen, you don't pick up the phone to chat. You don't read a manual to figure out, you're just acting. You're not taking in information. You're not being social. You are just in action mode. But in parasympathetic, when there isn't the emergency, you can take in information. You can be more social. And it's a time for your body to rest and repair itself. So as much as the fight or flight nervous system really depends on cortisol and adrenaline, the parasympathetic rest, digest, and repair really runs on oxytocin, right? So oxytocin is what allows us to tend and befriend, to connect socially, and not just to repair our bodies. Oxytocin does help with wound repair. It absolutely is anti-inflammatory, and it helps the body repair itself. And it enables wound repair, but it also enables the repair of ruptures, social ruptures. Because oxytocin gives you the ability to bond and trust and connect, you can tend and befriend and repair all these social connections that are really key for our survival. So what we have now these days, it's not very good, right? We're more isolated than ever. I mean, what's funny is when I wrote Good Chemistry, it was before COVID, and I was writing quite a bit about epidemics that were happening at that time. And I was talking about two main epidemics. And the first epidemic was the overdose epidemic, the opioid epidemic. People are dying. And then the second epidemic was a loneliness epidemic, that because of the isolation and loneliness that we had even before COVID, suicide rates were up, alcoholism is up, drug overdoses are up, hopelessness is up. We had an epidemic of loneliness and an epidemic of overdoses, and I don't think those two things are separated. I think that they are causal and they are correlated. But now we have an even bigger epidemic, which unfortunately is making the other two epidemics bigger also. So because of the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, we are all more isolated now than ever before. So you thought you were lonely before, it's worse now. And then the other thing it's really making, so we have a fear of contagion, right? So that puts you in fight or flight, not good for social skills. We're all wearing masks, right? So the problem with a mask is that you can't read social cues, right? You don't know whether I'm smiling or grimacing or yawning. And when you don't have those social cues, your brain panics and you end up sort of over in fight or flight more. So it's very stressful to be alone, to not be able to hold people that you want to hold, to not be able to hug and kiss and get together and go to bars and play music together. I mean, we all know what we're going through. It's not fun. It's bad for our bodies to be this isolated. And it really puts us in this chronic, stressful place, right? So the fear of contracting a possibly fatal disease puts us in this chronically stressed, traumatic place. And then the isolation itself is putting us in a chronically stressed, traumatic place. So what we have right now is more dysfunction and more sort of disunion than usual. And then the other issue here where I live and the not so United States of America is all this disunion and dysfunction is also making us incredibly anxious and agitated. My patients aren't doing very well. People are very, very worried about the fall of democracy or what's going to happen to the environment or reproductive rights and what's happening with immigrants and marginalized people and police brutality. We have so many things that we're really worried about and stressed out about. People aren't doing very well right now. And one of the reasons why I think Good Chemistry is such an important book is because I offer some solutions for all that unease. And the first set of solutions in the first chapter are just ways to get over to the parasympathetic nervous system and what you can do to calm yourself. And primarily, it really is just about breathing in and out through your nose. If you breathe in and out through your nose, it will already calm you and will keep you in parasympathetic. If you're breathing in and out through your mouth, you're more likely to be in sympathetic, fight or flight. So breathing in and out through your nose, making sure that your exhales are longer than your inhales. And this is where things like monologuing, like I'm doing now, or chanting or singing or playing a musical instrument, anything like that, where you're having a slow extended exhale and quicker inhales, that can also help to keep you calm. And I talk about some other things in good chemistry. I talk about something called havening, which is a particular way of stroking your arms, which can be very soothing. And you can accompany it. It feels good. I'm telling you, try this. You can also accompany this downward stroking motion with feel good sort of sentences or thoughts like, I am safe, I am cared for, I am looked after, I am loved. This is a soothing thing to do. The other thing you can do is block your right nostril and breathe in and out through your left nostril. And that is a great way, if you are getting very panicky, it is a good way to sort of abort a panic attack and to calm you down. It's called left nostril breathing. Give it a Google. One thing I'd love to say about good chemistry is I spent a lot of time on the notes section of this book. And if you go to drholland.com or naturalmood.com, and you click on good chemistry, you will come to a web page that has about 60 pages of notes from the book. So a lot of the links are to full scientific papers, a lot of extra information online about this book. One of the things I want to talk about, why I think that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy could be so useful to the field of psychiatry, is that a lot of psychiatric diagnoses are really the thing that you notice most about them is that there's something called cognitive rigidity, which is this sort of uh, a rigid way of thinking about things, a repetitive way about thinking about things. So for instance, if I have anorexia nervosa, I rigidly believe that I am too fat, I have to lose weight, I have to diet, I have to exercise because I'm not thin enough. And even though other people may be like, you're plenty thin, you really should eat, I am very rigid in my belief that I need to be thinner. And you see this kind of cognitive rigidity in other diagnoses, like in obsessive compulsive disorder. You may have very rigid beliefs about how many times you have to do something, or certain compulsive rituals that need to be performed. And you have this cognitive rigidity that they have to be performed a certain way. And you also see cognitive rigidity in addiction, where people keep going after the same behavior or substance because they want a particular feeling, but they're not really getting that feeling. They're getting a lot of other things that they didn't bargain for, but they keep going over and over thinking, maybe this time I'll have that feeling that I want. So there's this rigid thinking in a lot of substance abuse issues. And you also see some rigid thinking in depression and anxiety, with just perspective, like, oh, nothing ever goes my way, or things don't work out for me, or this is, this is going to be bad and I'm afraid. It's just like very rigid ways of thinking. So psychedelics have the potential to add a flexibility to the thinking. And they do this in a few ways. One of the ways is that the parts of the brain that are usually very active, that are very self-absorbed and self-obsessed, there's something called the default mode network that spends a lot of time sort of, how am I doing? How was I yesterday? What am I doing tomorrow? Who am I? What do I believe? Do I still believe this? Will I believe it tomorrow? Where was I yesterday? How am I doing socially? It's this sort of self-absorbed, self-obsessed circuitry, a way of thinking. It's very ego oriented. And so what happens with psychedelics, especially at high doses, is that the ego really gets quieted. The default mode network gets sort of disorganized. There's a circuitry that usually goes, and all of a sudden there isn't that circuitry. So it's a chance for other parts of the brain to communicate with each other that usually don't. And it's also just a chance for that self-absorbed ego to just quiet down and dissolve. So something that happens when at the peak of a psychedelic experience is you may experience ego dissolution. And this is just like a feeling that you don't exist anymore. So it can be scary. It can be hard to get there. But the upside is that different parts of the brain have a chance to communicate with each other where they typically wouldn't. And there's there's a chance for sort of new circuitry to get rebuilt when you start to come back down. Maybe the self-absorption has incorporated a few other things, or it's lost a few things, but there's less rigidity in the thinking. There's a little bit more fluidity in the thinking. And again, I want to remind everybody about oxytocin, that not only does it enable trust and bonding and connecting and childbirth and orgasm and nursing, but it also, and wound healing, it also enables neuroplasticity. And this is really important. So neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to sort of rewire itself and make some new connections. And there's a few different ways this can happen. The area between two brain cells that helps each of them communicate, that's called a synapse. So synaptogenesis means that new synapses are created, new connections between different brain cells are created. Then there's something called neurogenesis, which is actually new brain cells being formed. So between neurogenesis and synaptogenesis, you have neuroplasticity, which is sort of the brain remodeling itself a bit and rewiring itself. And so we see this with a lot of psychedelic therapies. You see this with ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic tea, and you see this with LSD, and you see this with psilocybin, which is a ingredient in magic mushrooms, so psychedelic mushrooms. Coming back to MDMA, MDMA reliably increases oxytocin levels pretty significantly. And one of the things that MDMA, I think, is very, very good at is enabling some cognitive flexibility and neuroplasticity. There is also this issue of the trusting and bonding, which I think is worth mentioning. One thing, if you give somebody a substance that increases oxytocin and you're doing ongoing psychotherapy with them, you're going to have an enhanced therapeutic alliance. And what this means is that the relationship between the therapist and the client is going to be enhanced because you've got this increased level of openness and trusting and flexibility. So what we're seeing with the MDMA PTSD studies is that the majority of people undergoing the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy are getting better and they're staying better. That they can explore their traumas with some level of kind of equanimity or acceptance and peace. You know, you can treat PTSD with regular psychotherapy, but it takes a long time. If people have been traumatized, they're often sort of sealed over and they don't really want to talk about the trauma. And it's a little bit like peeling an onion, except peeling an onion is easier because the onion stays in your hand and you peel it. But when you're working with a person who gets skittish or upset, they can disappear for months at a time. You know, you're getting somewhere in the therapy, but they start to get a little afraid and they pull back and they seal over and they don't want to talk about it. And then you spend months talking about other things that don't matter, or they disappear for a while. So it takes years to really get down to the malignant thing that needs to be excised and examined. And so, you know, one of the ways I think about MDMA assisted therapy is it's a little bit like anesthesia for surgery, where because the person is sort of open and in a parasympathetic state and ready to integrate information and ready to be trusting, they're more open to doing this kind of deep psychotherapeutic work that needs to happen. And also, some of the chemistry that MDMA engenders, it feels very good. People feel relaxed and less depressed and less anxious. And because it's a methamphetamine base, they also feel sort of awake, alert. They want to talk, they want to connect, they want to dig, they want to figure these things out. And very, very importantly, with MDMA, you have enhanced memory for the trauma and enhanced memory for the session itself, because you've taken a stimulant, basically. So I couldn't design a better molecule to allow therapy to go deeper and be more effective and more efficient. and for people to really remember what they sort of came up with during the experience, and the trauma that they unearthed. Um, so there's a lot of ways to treat trauma, and there are more and more psychedelics sort of coming on the scene. I'm really excited. It's a good time to be a psychiatrist, I will tell you. We've got more treatment options than ever before, and there's really great research going on. I'm just looking on the chat because if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking. But really, don't be shy. If you have a question, I really like Q&A. It's kind of the best part of a talk for me. So please go right ahead. I'm just going to talk about a couple more things while I'm hoping people start to write some chat questions. So one thing I think it's worth mentioning about where we are now, and one of the reasons why people are very anxious is just we don't know what's going to happen. Here in the States, we don't know what's going to happen with the election. We don't know really what's going to happen with COVID. Not knowing when things are going to get back to normal or if things are going to get back to normal is incredibly disquieting. And then there's the whole issue of that the earth is suffering and that we are damaging the earth. And I think of it as this sort of like background hum, like an app that's always running, that there's this low level sort of mourning for the earth and for what we're doing to the earth. And I know that if I'm really quiet, I can hear it. The big lessons that we learned from psychedelics, I think, is that everything is interdependent and that we really are all connected. And obviously people are connected with each other and people are connected with the planet. I have come away from my early psychedelic experiences with a really deep, profound knowing of this interconnectedness and interdependence. And I would say that we really have a biological drive toward this sort of connection and unity and oneness. And I would say that oxytocin really enables these states of unity and oneness. And I would further state that I think that that's what is driving a lot of our pathological behavior. And I would ask you to sort of pay attention to that sometimes if you think about what you're doing or why you're doing it, there's a desire to be included, to be connected, to be part of something. And I think it's good to just know that in yourself, and know that a lot of other people are going to have that too. And if you ever, even like if you're at work and somebody is disgruntled or complaining about something, chances are they've been overlooked and they haven't been included, and they their feelings are hurt. But underneath that is this sort of primal need as a social primate, that we want to know that we're fitting into the group and that the group likes us. And that means being seen and being heard and being validated and being included. So keep that in mind. The other thing I want to mention a couple quick things, 3 things, basically: sustainability, access, and ethics. So sustainability is this idea that some of the psychedelic medicines we're using are natural and come from the earth, and there is a real danger of over harvesting them. So I think this is the first and foremost, I think peyote is a big concern, that we're sort of over harvesting and that we need to focus on sustainability. And then I think also some of the ingredients that go into make ayahuasca really need to be protected. And this idea of sustainability, we just have to keep it in the forefront. And then with access, the big issue here is that the people who really need this medicine the most aren't necessarily the ones who are getting it. And right now, I think the psychedelic research community and the psychedelic community as a whole is fairly white and fairly male. And I think everybody is sort of paying attention to that and working toward having more diversity, having more inclusivity. But when these medicines start to be rolled out, when even ketamine and psilocybin and ibogaine, ayahuasca, MDMA-assisted therapy, these things are all going to be available in the not too distant future. And it's important that we find ways to make them accessible to everyone, but especially marginalized populations. And those are really the populations that need these medicines more than anybody. And then the last thing I would like to mention is ethics. Then there's a few angles of ethics that are important in the psychedelic field. The first is just clinicians behaving themselves and respecting boundaries and just following normal good ethics of what therapists are supposed to be doing. It's not that hard, but there have definitely been a few instances of bad actors and people sort of overstepping their bounds, and I cannot make a space for it. It's not going to be okay. It hurts the entire sort of movement. Everybody has got to be on their best behavior, because this is obviously a very controversial area, and it won't take much for things to get shut down, and everybody has to behave. And then the other ethics are just sort of the capitalist kind of ethics. I don't know if you could put those two words together. In the capitalist model, there are anti-competitive practices, and there's a certain amount of competition between businesses, and I would like to see as much cooperation and as little competition as is possible. So I'm just going to look at some Q&As here, and I see a Q from Paula Wise. Are psychedelics contraindicated for anyone on psychotropic drugs? What is the danger of re-triggering panic disorder that has been helped by psychotropic meds? So there's a lot to unpack here. So the first thing I will say is that there aren't a lot of good studies looking at the interaction of prescription medicine with these medicines. And it's sort of a fraught minefield. There are definitely some medicines that you can't mix with psychedelics. I think the best example I can give you is with ayahuasca, because ayahuasca has two components, and one of the components does not mix well with a number of medicines. So in general, if you're considering ayahuasca, it is the case that almost every psychiatric medicine you're on, you really shouldn't mix with it. None of the antidepressants, none of the stimulants. There may be some mood stabilizers, but I would say if you're on a mood stabilizer, ayahuasca may not be right for you anyway. So this is a big question of what do you do if you're on meds, but you would like to avail yourselves of these treatments? So one option is microdosing. Some people are taking very small doses of a psychedelic, like about a 1/10 of a macro dose or 1/10 of a usual recreational dose. And they would take that 1/10 of a dose, a microdose, maybe every 3 or 4 days. And there are a number of people who are microdosing while taking psychiatric medications, and it seems to be okay. But again, no double-blind, placebo-controlled studies really looking at this. But the bigger issue is, if you have a psychiatric diagnosis, is it okay for you to take psychedelics? And not always. Anybody with a history of schizophrenia or a history of psychosis or a history of manic episodes, you probably should not be taking these medicines because there are just too many risks, or you need to do it with a psychiatrist actually actively involved in your care. For now, all of the research, none of us are taking people with a history of psychosis into these studies. So all the psilocybin studies, all the MDMA studies, if you have a history of psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder with manic episodes, you can't be in these studies. So it's just not safe. So it's not just that combining the medicines with these drugs may be dangerous, but combining the diagnoses with these drugs can be dangerous. A lot of the research with MDMA is being done in post-traumatic stress disorder. We often need people to get off of their medicines before they can have the MDMA. And this is a long, complicated process, right? Tapering off your medicines has to be done very gradually. Um, and it really needs to be supervised by a psychiatrist. Hold on one second. Getting a bit of a dry, scratchy cough here, but don't worry. I hope I answered that question appropriately. Feel free to follow up on with another question. What are your thoughts about ADD and prescription meds? Is the lack of focus part of the disconnection you were mentioning? That is a really good question. People these days are feeling even more scattered than usual. I think that when you are in fight or flight, your attention is a bit piecemeal. Most, you know, I'm one of the things I talk about in Good Chemistry, and one of my books that I didn't mention, was a book on cannabis. So, excuse me, I really think that CBD can help quite a bit with lending sort of a calm focus. So I have a lot of patients who use stimulants for ADD. I try to get them to also incorporate CBD and try to use CBD at other times. And I have patients who are combining CBD with ADD meds because they sort of take the edge off a little bit of how stimulating and sort of sharp the ADD meds are. So there are people who are using microdosing to treat their ADD. One of the things that microdosing can do is help put you in a state of flow, where you really lose yourself in the project. And if you have ADD, you would like to be in flow sometimes. So I do think that some people are using microdosing to treat their ADD, and I am absolutely a believer in cannabis-based medicines and in CBD for helping with ADD. I am now looking at the Q&A, so hold on one second. So I'm getting like specific questions here about mixing some medicines with psychedelics, and it is really hard for me to answer these specific questions, and to tell you that it is safe to do. But what I will tell you is that there is a lot of information on microdosing. Jim Fadiman, and Sophia Korb, Korb. They have got a website where they are gathering data from people who are microdosing and who are on meds so that they can have more information about whether it is safe to combine these things. I actually don't know what the answer is for Suboxone, and I should, and I'm sorry, but I don't know if you can mix Suboxone with microdosing. But I will tell you that I have had several patients use large dose, macro dose psilocybin to walk away from their opiate addiction. And I have several patients who have had positive experiences with ayahuasca who are able to walk away from their opiate addiction. And I know of several people who have used ibogaine to end their opiate addiction. So I do think that this field of psychedelic medicine will be a boon to the field of addiction medicine, addiction therapy. You know, some of the earliest studies with LSD were using it to treat alcoholism, and they had really good results. I mean, there were over 1,000 papers published with, I believe, 40,000 subjects, showing that these psychedelic assisted therapies were safe and effective. And a lot of these studies were done in the 50s and 60s. And we're just sort of starting to come back to it now, but there's a real resurgence now of psychedelic research that's happening. And there are psychedelic research centers that are cropping up all over the place. In the UK, at Johns Hopkins, at Mass General, at UC Berkeley, Mount Sinai is creating a center, and NYU has a center, and Columbia looks like they're going to be putting a center together. So, you know, watch this space. I think that there are a lot of really exciting things happening in in the field of, I guess, what will be called psychedelic medicine. And not just for psychiatric issues, but it really looks like these psychedelics could potentially help medical issues as well. I explain in Good Chemistry about the mind-body connection and how so many medical symptoms really can come from a place of psychological wounding. And so sometimes really attending to this trauma can help your physical symptoms as well. And then the other issue is that a lot of these psychedelics are anti-inflammatory. So they can help to treat illnesses that have a basis in inflammation, which are a lot of illnesses, I'll tell you. Arthritis and heart disease and cancer, and a lot of metabolic issues and diabetes, they all have a basis in inflammation. So anything that you can do that's anti-inflammatory can help to treat these illnesses. And microdosing is anti-inflammatory, and cannabis is anti-inflammatory, and CBD is anti-inflammatory. And all of the psychedelics that we're talking about are anti-inflammatory. And oxytocin itself is anti-inflammatory, right? Being in the parasympathetic state, that is anti-inflammatory. So anything you can do to get yourself in that state. So things like meditating and yoga and just putting your phone down and closing your laptop and just disconnecting, going out in nature. These things can put you into para, and para is anti-inflammatory. Let's see. So somebody's asking if MDMA therapy is offered in Canada, and there, I believe there are sites that are part of the phase 3 multi-center trial. And so what I would suggest is that you go to maps.org, maps.org. And the website's pretty easy to navigate, and you will find the research, and then it will say, I want to be involved in research, and you can click on it and tell them where you live, and you can see if the Canadian sites are currently taking people or not. Because of COVID, unfortunately, not every site is doing face-to-face, but some of them still are. If we don't have more questions, I'm going to look for some other things to talk about. I have started thinking about this idea of disruption. When our beloved dear leader ran for president, he positioned himself as like an outsider who was going to shake things up and be disruptive. And I think that people were really excited about this idea of something disruptive that was going to fix things and shake things up. And I'm definitely looking at psychedelic medicine as a disruptive technology. I think that these psychotropics, these like neuromodulators, they're consciousness medicines. They are allowing us to see how we think and see how we feel and see how our past traumas are informing our current behaviors. That's really revolutionary, and they are disruptive technology. I mean, this is not typically, psychiatry is usually all about the daily dose. You take something, you take a pill every day. It may not make you more connected. It'll just make you not mind that you're disconnected. You won't feel the pain of a disconnection so much, but it won't necessarily change how connected you are. So, the way I sort of think of a lot of these medicines in psychiatry, the ones that we're using now, where people taking pills every single day, it's sort of like sweeping the dust under the carpet, and you're giving a band-aid to the solution, but you're not really getting at the root cause of the problem. But these disruptive medicines, the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, will get to the root cause of your symptoms, and that can lead to real relief. The state of bliss understanding, and connection you can access when experimenting with ayahuasca or other psychedelics? How can it be sustained in the day-to-day life? How do you gradually manage to switch between one state and reality? So this state of like a unified state, right? Um, it's funny because one of the original titles for Good Chemistry, I wanted to call it United States because I wanted to talk about these United States of consciousness that these drugs can lend, but not just drugs. You can feel this united state of consciousness when you are having a deep conversation with somebody and you feel like you're on the same wavelength, or when you're playing music with your band and you get into the pocket and you're in a groove and you feel like you're all in the same place. You can feel this sort of united state or group mind if you're on the dance floor. I appreciate some of the things I'm saying now we just can't do now, but we will eventually. You will eventually get back on a dance floor. And play with your band and hug your friends. And so these United States are also transformational. Being out in nature, being in awe, being in flow, losing yourself so much in what you're doing. Like these are states where you are in parasympathetic, where you are open, where there is growth and healing and neuroplasticity happening. And they can happen in any number of places. I don't mean to imply that the only way to get this good chemistry is with drug use. You can get it from exercise, you can get it from sex, you can get it from masturbation, you can get it from meditation, from floating. You can go in a sensory deprivation tank, or you could just float in a hot tub. But there are ways to access this feeling of bliss and openness and being in the parasympathetic state and feeling connected. You can get there without drugs. And I do talk about all of these things in Good Chemistry. So I know that this particular talk was a bit drug heavy. There are all kinds of ways to get connected and to feel connected, and they don't all require psychedelics or cannabis. So, I mean, here's a question. What are your thoughts on psychedelics being medicalized so they're not available for personal growth? So that is important. I think, in the same way that cannabis sort of starts out as like medical marijuana, and then eventually you have adult use legalization, I think that psychedelics will follow somewhat of a similar path, where the first step is just to get people used to the idea that these can be therapeutic, they can be helpful, that they're medicines. And then we start knowing people who've had the medicines and have had good results with the medicines, and then we all get more comfortable with the idea. And eventually you get to talk about things like personal growth and personal betterment. I mean, the truth is already, if you look around the world at how many people are taking ayahuasca or ibogaine or psilocybin or MDMA, in a research setting versus in a recreational setting, there are very, very, very few people doing research and plenty of people doing experimentation on their own. So this is one of the reasons why it's really important that we can talk about it, that we can educate ourselves about it, that we can practice harm reduction and figure out safer ways to do these things, because these things are happening. We're doing them. We might as well make sure that they're safe. One of the biggest risks, honestly, is that these drugs are illegal. And because they're illegal, you don't know what you're buying. You don't know what you're getting. There is this inherent risk because of policy, not because of the drugs themselves. So part of harm reduction is drug policy reform, so that we can do education and more drug testing and make the whole drug taking experience safer for everybody. But I do think that this idea of that you can just take it for betterment, that you have to have PTSD, or you don't have to be addicted to opiates, that you can just have a psychedelic experience because you want to know yourself better, or you want to have a spiritual journey, or you want to feel connected. You want to feel connected to the universe and to nature. I mean, these are therapeutic things. I think the basic premise that therapeutic and recreational are two different things is really, it's a false dichotomy. All recreation is therapeutic. By definition, if you're in a recreative state and you are relaxed and enjoying yourself, that's already therapeutic. So to me, especially in psychiatry where everything is gray, there's ash gray and there's charcoal gray, there's all 50 shades of gray. So, I mean, psychiatry, nothing is black and white and everything is on a spectrum. And you can take these medicines because you have significant pathology, or you could take them because you just want to be healthier and you want to be a more integrated, actualized person. And that is, both of those things are completely legitimate. And I don't think that they're really that far from each other. I've run out of time. I see that it is by my clock 10:31. If you've stayed and listened for an hour, I would like to thank you for listening to me talk. And you can learn more about good chemistry if you go to drholland.com or naturalmood.com. And thank you for paying attention. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely evening.